This portrait is a bit of a mystery. It has got a bit of a backstory, and I do know a little bit about it. She was apparently hung for a very long time in some sort of manor house, in the usual sort of place, up the stairs and round the corner, in a seldom used corridor, mainly forgotten and disregarded for years and years. An elderly widow had decided to sell up as the place was getting too much for her after the passing of her husband, and was apparently getting rid of surplus stuff she either disliked or was unwanted by other family members, and which she wasn't taking with her. The portrait the family always believed to be some sort of distant relation, which they also believed to be a lady-in-waiting to Queen Elizabeth I. The painting had originally been said to have been set in an ornate gilt frame, which over the years had begun to deteriorate and had been eaten away by woodworm and eventually fell to bits. Despite this, the portrait was finally just left, hung on the wall by the stretcher frame. None of the family actually seemed to like this portrait, either apparently thinking she was too gaudy and overdressed, hence the reason it was left unloved and unrestored. Despite the family assuming, wrongly as it happens, that this lady was part of the Elizabethan court, they were possibly right in another aspect of how they had come to own it. As judging by the very elaborate costume and jewels, it's certain Queen Elizabeth I would not have allowed anyone to dress so richly in her presence, as she was the only one who could do that. The legend had it that this portrait was bought with several other pictures by one of their forebears to decorate his newly acquired house. This auction had happened apparently on the edge of London in an open-air market, maybe the present-day site of Smithfield Market or Covent Garden. This was custom practice where public auctions were concerned, prior to having established proper auction houses. However, if so, what was once open fields on the edge of London is now definitely central London, so that would suggest, if the family story is true, that any such auction, if correct, would have taken place literally many years ago. The auction house had described her as a late 16th, early 17th century woman, but my client had an inkling who she was. She was in fact Princess Isabella Clara Eugenia Habsburg, born in December 1566 as the firstborn daughter to her father, the Spanish King Philip, and his second wife, Queen Elizabeth of Valois, becoming Infantana of Spain. So, as you can see, there's quite a backstory with this portrait, how it has come into this country, where it has been originally, but you can see that it has had quite a life. I'm just looking with the UV light here to try and see what's overpaint, what's dirt, what's discoloured varnish, and there's a lot to do with this picture. It is very dirty, and there are elements that will need to be addressed. So my first port of call, as ever, is to test the portrait, test the painting, and see what we'll remove. It does have this yellow film on there, which is patchy, let's say, which could mean that it has been cleaned in the past or someone's had a bit of a go at it. But you can see here, my first solution is removing, and it is a very brown, yellowy brown, nicotine-y, smoky kind of residue. It's not made too much of a difference as well, so it could well be that I need to strengthen my solution a little, or it could be that there is another layer underneath, possibly a discoloured varnish layer. So this is the same solution. I'm just having another go over that area, trying to brighten those whites as much as possible. And then this is using a solvent to see if there is a discoloured varnish that will remove. And there does seem to be a bit of a layer. It's a little bit opaque. I'd like to see something a little bit stickier and more yellowed, but it is cleaning, which is positive. You can see there the residue. And I'm going to do the same instance a little bit further down the portrait. So the paint is quite thick here. You can see straight away that first solution lifting that yellow-brown layer, and it's making quite the difference there, which is nice to see. And the paint layer is stable, so that's encouraging. And then once that top layer is cleaned, I can then go in with my solvent to see the varnish layer and make sure that will remove. And again, it is brightening that as well. So with these tests in mind, I can revert back to the client and tell them that it will clean, which is good news, and then we can continue with the rest of the treatments. So the back of the canvas has this label, or part of a label. Now I'm not sure, there's no remnants of an inscription on there or any details, so it just needs removing. I'm just wondering if there is any damage underneath there as well. So I'm just going to remove that and see what it is hiding, if it is hiding anything. Unfortunately, there's nothing on there that is salvageable, and underneath it looks like it wasn't hiding any damage. So whatever that was doing, or what it had on, has long since faded, and it just needs removing so that it can be prepared for the lining process that I'm going to do. So I'm going to remove this from its stretcher, and I'm going to look at relaxing it before relining. So I'm just going to remove the tacks from this picture and remove that stretcher. I always quite like seeing what's behind the stretcher bars. In this instance, we've got hundreds of years worth of dirt, bits of wood, bits of Christmas tree needles. The tacking edge is quite deteriorated, as you can see. That top section though, it looks like it's been cut down from a larger canvas or something. It's just weird why there's that excess and not even straight. This area's had some damp and that's why it's falling apart. Same with these corners as well. It's quite a tight weave as well, so I'm thinking maybe this isn't 16th century, maybe it's a little bit more recent than that. And the other interesting thing is that top edge, why it's been cut down. I'm not entirely sure why that would have been done, but as you can see, it's in quite poor condition, and I need to clean off all that dirt and dust and accumulations. So I need to get rid of that before I can start on the next process. So I'm just going to brush that off and get it nice and tidy. So to do this, I want to gently flatten out the creases where it's been resting on the stretcher bars. The painting is quite strong, it's quite good condition apart from the crackler, but I just want to apply a little bit of humidity, which will just soften those straight edges and the tacking edges, if you like. So I want to save as much of this as possible. There's some elements that are quite loose and will probably not be required during the next process, but I'm just trying to save as much of this as I can. So I'm just going to gently move these sections out so it's going to be flatter. I'm going to apply over the top. This is just a thin piece of acrylic, so I can just apply a little bit of gentle pressure. And I want to introduce a little bit of humidity to that. So to do that, I'm going to cut some blotting paper, apply a little bit of moisture, and then put this underneath the portrait and just allow the moisture to just gently relax that canvas weave. And that will allow the next process where I actually reline the painting to be easier for it to attach onto the new piece of linen. So as with a lot of the processes in restoration, less is always better than more. So I don't want to flood this portrait with moisture. I just want to use a very little amount. So this paper is going to hold some distilled water, which I'll spray over. Not an awful lot. And then this will just gently, I don't know, kind of evaporate or transfer into the canvas weave, and those real rigid, strong folds and crease lines will just relax. So you can see here the water just going onto the paper, and it will just swell that a little bit, and then the canvas is going to be placed directly above that, and then this humidity will just help soften and relax those creases. And it will also help to relax the stretcher bar mark. So where the canvas over time has slackened and rested on the stretcher bars, you can see that vertical line and the horizontal one. This, with a little bit of weight, will also help flatten those out and give the canvas a much flatter and more uniform appearance. So I'm going to leave that for a while now and come back to it, at least for an hour or a couple of hours. And like I say, there's not an awful lot of moisture on there, but the humidity will just relax that canvas. So while that's relaxing, I will let you know what I found out about our portrait. So this is Princess Isabella. She's the daughter of King Philip II. And you can see here, this portrait by Franz Purvis the Younger is an official royal portrait, and it does, or she does, closely resemble our painting. As you can see here, we've got exactly the same jewels, we've got the same costume, we've got the same headwear. And this portrait, the head and shoulders, this is in Bruges, and I'm going to probably say that this is a little bit unfair, but I'm going to show this side by side to our portrait. So you can see that this is definitely a copy of one of these paintings, and I think it's probably the standing portrait because the way the jewels hang, I think are similar to this stance rather than the head and shoulders. So Princess Isabella, she was ruler of the Spanish Netherlands. King Philip thought that she would rule better than his son Carlos, and she married her first cousin, the Archduke. And the peace that ensued from the Treaty of London had a positive effect on trade between England and the Spanish Netherlands, as well as that of Holland and France. Land in the Low Countries was reclaimed from the sea, and this helped both countries agriculturally, all of which helped establish industry and the establishment of imports and exports of luxury items. And this laid the foundations for the so-called Golden Age of the Dutch Republic, which in turn led to flowering of culture, music and art. Isabella and Albert decided to build on this newly found trust by enlarging their court to make it the centre hub of diplomacy between the Habsburgs' land in Spain, the New World, and in Austria and Central Europe. This welcome stability enabled their court in Brussels to become a glittering centre for education, music, art and literature. And I can attest to this, having visited Brussels last year. I mean, what a fabulous place, and some of the artwork that they have on display, the old masters. It must have been a real kind of, like I said, Renaissance or Golden Age. And yeah, this just shows in the amount of great art that was created in that time and still exists today. So, what do we know about the original artist? Franz Purvis the Younger, or Franz Purvis II, was a Flemish painter who specialised in portrait painting. He was the third generation of a prominent family of religious and portrait painters. He was a court painter for the archdukes in Brussels, the Gonzaga Duke of Mantua, and then the French court. The majority of his work is royal portraits, mainly full length, but he also painted some altarpieces. He painted the Brussels-based Spanish regents of the Netherlands, as we know, and the Duke of Mantua, and married a Medici, Queen of France. His portraits were pleasing to his patrons, so he must have flattered them a little bit, but they were somewhat static, so there was no dramatic situations or landscape backgrounds, but he is noted for his depiction of costume, jewellery, draperies. As you'll see in some of these portraits, the detail in the in the lace work is fantastic. He's got really good modelling. He's really good at modelling those flesh tones if they are a little bit stylized. But look at the fashions. I mean, look at the amount of embroidery and jewels, and yeah, just fantastic. So, and here's that portrait of the King of France as well, the young king. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that what we have here is a reproduction of one of those portraits of Isabella. When it was completed, I'm not entirely sure. It isn't an exact replica, it isn't an exact copy, but perhaps there was always diplomatic gifts going back and forth, and I'm sure Albert and Isabella sent portraits out. Whether this is from the studio of Franz Pourbus or not, or whether it's a later reproduction, more research is required. For me, the stretcher and the canvas weave are quite modern compared to this period, so it could have been a later reproduction from one of the portraits. But yeah, we will probably never really know where this originated from. But it's nice to know who the sitter is and who the original artist is, because sometimes we don't get that information. So I'm just preparing this stretcher now for the relining. I've been experimenting with some new lining adhesive and different, well, it's the same technique, it's just different adhesive that I'm using. So I'm going to be doing that, and then once that's been lined and attached to that new piece of Belgian linen, we will have a look at giving her a clean and varnish removal. So from the lining process, now you can see how much flatter that canvas plane is. That craquelure has flattened out. The stretch bar marks have more or less gone now. You'll still see them a little bit, but so much more improved. I've managed to save most of the tacking edges as well, so she looks a lot better, and she's good for another 100, 200 years now, which is nice. So the first thing I'm doing is using my first solution, and I'm going to remove all that nicotine, smoke, tar, staining, and you can see the difference that's making already. So this is the top layer, and I'm just going to gently work my way around this rough and show you the difference. Now, I do feel bad comparing her to the Franz Porbus portrait, but when you actually do spend time with her, she is very beautiful, and whether it's a good likeness or not, there is a real sweetness to this painting, and there's a real, I don't know, I like her. I think she's got a nice face and she looks good. All that horrible brown mottled staining is beginning to remove now, and you can see the beautiful tones of her skin coming through. I think she looks quite kind actually. She's probably a lot kinder than the real Isabella, who I'm sure was a force to be reckoned with. But yeah, what a difference now. The crackler on her face is quite bad, so that may well need to be looked at some point, but I'll be able to make a better decision on that once the full clean has been done. But it's just nice to get that horrible brown, sooty, smoky layer off and see her for who she is. So that was the top layer removed, and now I'm using my second solution, which will take off any residual varnish layer that is present. So it's a fairly weak solution. I'm not entirely sure if this painting has been cleaned before. It possibly will have been. So especially in those brushed highlights, there may be little bits of overpaint that removed, and it is getting brighter. Now, the tones that I was expecting from the varnish removal, I would have thought these would have been very vibrant, brilliant white, like the original portrait that I showed you. But what I'm finding is, even though there is a discoloured varnish that's removing, the tones that are present are still quite warm and yellowed. So this is making me, or leading me to believe that this copy or this reproduction was taken from either a different version that may well have been yellowed or discoloured from time. So it's definitely not taken from one of those beautifully cleaned paintings that I showed you earlier. It's been reproduced from a painting that has had discoloured varnish present. And that is why, even though this has been cleaned and the varnish removed, it still has that appearance of an old yellowed painting. So for my mind, that's where this painting has come from. It's been reproduced from an older discoloured version somewhere down the line. Now, there will have been lots of these paintings as gifts, diplomatic gifts sent out by Isabella and Albert, and perhaps this is one of those. Or it could have been reproduced from a book where the original photographic record had an original or an old painting that had discoloured. So that's what I'm finding now with this clean. So I would like to have seen these whites get a lot brighter and a lot whiter. It's not the case. They have got this warm tone to them, and that's what's making me believe this has been reproduced from an older portrait. Well, regardless of the background, I still need to do what's right by this painting, and this is the crackler that we've got present, and it's quite wide and it's quite varied. quite big cracks. Now, if these were small, I would say they're in keeping with the age, but I do feel like they distract from the face. So in my mind, I may well look at putting some of the larger of those cracks back with some retouching, just to minimize them and allow you to enjoy the portrait for what it is. I do think that some of these are quite thick, and just by gently colour matching and pushing those tones back, it will make the portrait more enjoyable at viewing distance. Before I apply any retouching to the painting, I'm going to apply a barrier varnish. This is a conservation grade hydrocarbon varnish, which has got really good properties against yellowing. So I'm going to apply this first, and then any retouchings that I apply will be on top of this varnish layer and can be reversed with time. I'm going to be using my bound resin pigments to do this. Again, they've got great light, fast properties, and will just allow me to, I think I'm just going to push back those cracks on her forehead. You can see here that they're still visible, and I think that just spoils the enjoyment of this portrait. So I will be retouching those in once this varnish has dried. So these are my restoration chips, and it's been a while, well, it's been a few weeks since I've used them, so it's always good to start with a clean palette. The idea with the retouching is to push back these cracks. The painting is showing its age. If these were a lot smaller and not as noticeable, I may well leave them, but when you're looking at the portrait from viewing distance, they aren't quite noticeable, and I feel like it does spoil your appreciation of the painting, and they're quite prominent in the face. So using these restoration chips, I'm just trying to push those back. So I'm going to build up in layers with a pale layer first, just to fill those gaps. And then once that's dried, I'll go over again and then match in and make sure it's a real good tonal match with the rest of the painting. Some are deeper than others, and some are quite fine. But rather than fill them and take the filler off and all that, it's unnecessary. Just by pushing them back and then seeing here from viewing distance the difference that it makes, you can actually enjoy the portrait. So that's the first pass of the lighter tones, and then I'm going to go back in again and apply some more pigment or more washes over the top just to tone them in a little bit and push them back, so that when you are viewing the painting, you're just able to look at the picture and enjoy it for what it is, rather than focusing on those cracks. And with that retouching done and the top coat of varnish dry, it's time to fit it back up into its frame. Now, this isn't the original frame. My client is going to source something more in keeping with the portrait, and will be using the images that I found from the gallery at Bruges of the originals to source something a little bit more appropriate. I'm just applying a backing board to this as well, just to protect the painting from the rear, and also just to provide a little bit of information that we found out about the painting. So she's been relaxed, relined, cleaned, retouched, and looks much better for it. Here you can see the before and after, much brighter. All that dirty yellowed brown tobacco staining has been removed. The discoloured varnish has been removed, and you can enjoy the opulence of her outfit and see her face once again. I'm really pleased with the way she's turned out. She is a beautiful little portrait and another little slice of history. So yeah, I'm glad that we've restored her, and it was nice to spend time with her in the studio and learn a little bit about the Habsburg Princess. Right guys, that's all we've got time for this week. I hope you enjoyed the journey we went on with the Habsburg Princess. Still a little bit of a mystery about how that painting came to exist, what purpose it served. Was it a diplomatic gift? Was it a later reproduction? Was it taken from the original? Was it copied out of a book? I don't know. I think more research will be needed, but it's definitely after that painting that I showed you of Isabella. So it looks so much better. It's in much better condition, and it is a lot cleaner. And yeah, it's a nice little picture. So I hope my client will be pleased with it when they get it back. Weather report. Let's have a look. It's been a while. Sunshine and blue skies. So it's mid-January now. It's still icy cold. We've finished with the ice blast that we had a few weeks ago. I'd just like to say thank you to all my patrons. Thanks for your support, guys. It means a lot. If you've not been over to Patreon yet, head over there. There's exclusive paintings, there's behind-the-scenes footage, there's vlogs, there's tutorials, and I'm trying to get up to 200 patrons. When I get up to 200, I've got a lovely spanking new apron to give away. I think I'm only about 50 away, so head over there if you haven't already. And next time you see me, I have another portrait for you that is going to be a good one. Hope you have a nice weekend, and I will see you all soon. Thanks guys, bye.